I was once something holy. I remember that clearly, not in words, for I do not speak like men do, but in presence, in being, in the way my clay remembers the warmth of fire and the sweetness of resin sealed within. I was a vessel for something sacred. I was chosen, not crafted in haste, not poured carelessly, but molded by hands that trembled slightly, perhaps from reverence, perhaps from age. I was held to the sun to harden, and when the last trace of moisture had gone, I was filled, carefully, with pieces of hardened sap, golden and coarse, gathered from distant lands where trees weep their secrets into the air. When the first pinch was dropped into flame, I felt it, the release, the surrender, the curling breath of something ancient that rose above the noise and claimed attention not with sound, but with fragrance. People knelt while I stood. They whispered prayers while I held fragrance. I heard names I did not understand, syllables shaped by sorrow, by longing, by praise. There were tears, so many tears that mixed invisibly with the scent I carried, offering something deeper than aroma, offering heartache, hope, hunger for the holy. Some came barefoot, others trembling. Some lit candles with shaking hands, others simply sat in silence. But all of them, every one, came with something inside that longed to be laid bare before someone unseen. They never looked at me directly, but I was always there, central but unnoticed, like the breath in their lungs. And in that anonymity, I found purpose. I was content to burn slowly, to empty myself one grain at a time into the holy fire, to be part of what could not be touched yet filled the air. Time, of course, changes everything. There was a day one I cannot forget when the rituals slowed. The hands came less often, the candles burned shorter, the prayers grew faint. One morning, I was moved, not with ceremony, but with neglect. Lifted not by a priest, but by a distracted apprentice who carried me down a corridor I had never seen, whose hands were stained with ash and who did not speak to me. I was placed on a shelf in a storeroom where the light was dim and the air smelled not of incense, but of mildew and old rope. There were other vessels there, cracked, forgotten, broken. I was not broken, but I was still, so very still. Even now, I am here, tucked behind crates and broken oil lamps, beside a fallen scroll and a torn piece of cloth. Dust coats me thickly. My lid no longer fits as it once did. The room grows colder each year. Yet inside me, still, there are fragments, not many, just enough. And when the wind slips through the cracks in the wall and brushes across my opening, I feel the stir of scent again, brief, elusive, but real. I remember what I was, what I held, who I served. And I wonder, as the wind moves on without pause, if anyone else remembers. The priests used to speak of fire that did not consume, of smoke that carried prayers skyward like birds returning home. I do not know heaven, I do not know God, but I have known devotion. I have known hands that trembled not from fear, but from awe. I have known the silence that falls when a soul dares to speak its deepest need. I have held the fragrant resin that once kissed flames and became something invisible, yet unignorable. I have felt heat, not just of fire, but of hearts kindled in worship. That memory remains not just within me, but as me. I do not resent the silence now. It is thick, but not without memory. The shadows are deep, but they are full of echoes. Somewhere in this stillness, I believe, a promise lingers. I believe, though I do not see, that what was once holy cannot remain forgotten forever. That the prayers I bore did not vanish. That the one they were meant for heard them, even if he has not yet answered. Or perhaps he has, in ways unseen, in lives reshaped, in burdens lifted without fanfare. Perhaps the very scent that once rose from me became the thread of a miracle. Sometimes I dream, though I do not sleep. I dream of hands once more lifting me, of a new priest not aged, not learned, but humble, whose eyes burn not with knowledge, but with hunger for something more. I dream of being opened again, of releasing all that I have kept within, not just the fragrance, but the memory, the story, the longing. I dream that I will not be used in ritual, but in welcome, that I will be placed not on a temple altar, but at the feet of someone unexpected, someone small, someone poor, someone holy in a way no one sees. And in that dream, I see something that has never happened before. The fragrance rises, but not to the ceiling, not to the heavens. It rises to the eyes of a child who does not flinch from the smell, who does not cry at the smoke, but who smiles, as if recognizing something ancient and good. And then, something even stranger, the child touches me, not as object, but as offering. And suddenly, I know I was never meant to be stored. I was never meant to be sealed. I was never meant to be sacred for the sake of reverence alone. I was meant to be given, to be spent, to be poured out in love. They no longer touch me, but I still remember the touch. The rough calluses of old men who had spent years reading scrolls by candlelight. The soft hands of women who lingered longer in prayer. The trembling fingers of children who did not yet understand what prayer meant, but reached out anyway, instinctively, as if drawn to something beyond the ordinary. I remember the warmth of their palms, the way their fingertips hesitated just above my rim, the moment before they dared to dip into the sacred. They came not just with questions, but with confessions, silent and trembling. Some would come in the early morning, before the sun broke over the hills, when dew still clung to the stones, and the air was quiet enough to hear the sound of fabric shifting, breath-catching, hearts beating fast. They moved slowly, not because they were unsure, but because they carried burdens heavy enough to bend the soul. Their words, those I could not understand, tumbled out like broken wings, desperate to lift but too weary to fly. And yet, they placed them on the smoke, trusting that somehow, somewhere, someone would see. I do not speak of this lightly. I was not merely a vessel. I was a participant in mysteries I could not comprehend. The resin within me was more than scent, it was memory. It was petition. It was surrender. It was all the unspoken things a heart cannot carry alone. And I, humble clay hardened by fire, was allowed to hold them, to be the last earthly thing they touched before rising into the unseen. What is a prayer, if not a kind of longing shaped into breath? And what is breath, if not the wind that moves the invisible? But now they do not come. The door to the room creaks open once a year, maybe less. A boy entered once, searching for a scroll, his sandals too large, his eyes too quick. He passed me by. His shadow lingered longer than he did. No one remembers what I held. No one stirs my contents. They speak of new things, now new rituals, new forms. They burn oil in metal lamps and sing with instruments I have never heard. They speak with fire in their voices, but it is a different fire. I do not begrudge them. I have no bitterness. Their songs are beautiful too, and yet a part of me aches, not with jealousy, but with yearning. For in all the newness, has the old been entirely lost? Does no one remember the prayers that had no words, the faith that dared not shout, the longing that was too sacred to name? I was there for those moments. I absorbed them. I kept them. When the room was empty and the candles extinguished, I held them still. The echoes of worship do not vanish with silence. They settle, they sleep, waiting for the right breath, the right moment, to rise again. There were times I feared I would be broken not by hands, but by time itself, that my clay would crack, that the resin inside would turn to dust, that the silence would grow so thick it would press inward and crush whatever remained. But I have endured, not because I am strong, but because what I once held was stronger. Fragrance, once released, cannot be retrieved. It clings to stone, to cloth, to memory. It weaves itself into the unseen fabric of a place. Even now, long after the last ember faded, I know something lingers. I have come to believe that nothing offered in love is ever wasted, that no act of surrender disappears into void, that even a single grain of resin, offered with a pure heart, changes someone, even if the change goes unseen. I have felt the presence of the holy, not in form, not in voice, but in the way the air once changed when a soul laid itself bare beside me. That presence has not left. It waits, perhaps, as I do, not impatiently, but faithfully, because the holy does not forget. The holy remembers in ways men cannot. Once, a woman knelt for hours without speaking. Her hands did not rise. Her eyes did not close. She stared into the fire, unmoving, unblinking, and though she brought no incense that day, I swear the room filled with fragrance, as if the longing in her chest was so strong it burned on its own, needing no flame, no ritual, no words. She left behind no coin, no cloth, no mark, but I have never forgotten her. She was empty, but not hollow, grieving, but not alone. I believe someone heard her. I believe something changed. I have not seen her since. But sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, when the light slants through the cracks in the wall and touches the rim of my lid, I remember her face. I remember the others too. Not their names, but their weight. The way they leaned into the holy, even when it did not answer back. I wonder if they knew, if any of them knew, that something was listening, that their prayers did not vanish, that what they poured into me rose higher than rooftops, pierced deeper than silence. I am not waiting to be used again. That time has passed. What I long for is not utility, but memory. Not ritual, but return. I do not need to be placed at the center. I only long to be seen, to be remembered as the vessel that once stood still so others could move, that once gave up its sweetness so others could find peace. I was never the point. I was always the bridge. And if I could speak now to those who pass me by without notice, I would not ask to be lifted. I would only whisper, look back. Remember when silence was enough. Remember when prayer was assent. Remember when faith was something you did in the dark, with no one watching, no one praising, no one promising reward. Remember that kind of faith, because it was real, it was raw, it was holy. And I believe, with all that is left within me, that the day will come again, that someone will walk into this room not looking for scrolls or lamps or treasure, but for something forgotten. They will find me, not because I shine, not because I call out, but because they are quiet enough to hear what is still speaking. They will open me not with force, but with wonder. And when they do, a scent will rise, faint at first, then stronger. And in that moment, memory will become presence. What once was will live again. It is strange, the way memory works when one has no eyes, no ears, no breath. I remember not through sight or sound, but through impressions, through weight and silence and scent. I remember being moved, not often, but purposefully. I remember being wrapped in cloth, carried in both reverent and trembling hands. I remember the heat of fire before me, the rise of smoke that carried my contents away grain by grain, each pinch a prayer too sacred for words. But I also remember the days when no one came, when the room stayed cold and the hearth unlit, when footsteps passed without pause, when even silence grew silent. I think often of the last time I was used. It was not a grand ceremony, no feast, no festival, no crowd gathered to witness. It was just one man. He came quietly, near dusk, when the sky outside was streaked with crimson and gold. He did not light the lamps. He did not sing. He simply sat beside me. His breathing was slow, but not steady. There was a trembling in him, like the trembling of someone holding too much for too long. He opened my lid with both hands, as if afraid that the moment might break him. He reached in not for display, but for offering, and placed a small portion of resin on the dying embers. Not much, barely enough, and yet it was everything. When he placed the resin onto the fire, there was no sound, no visible change in the room, but I felt something shift, as if the very air leaned forward, listening, as if the silence had been waiting, and now, finally, it could breathe. The scent rose gently, unfurling like a ribbon in water, curling through the space and folding itself into the creases of the man's clothes, his hair, his soul. He did not speak, not even a whisper, but he wept. He wept like the world had cracked and all the oceans wept through him. I did not weep, but I held the moment, tenderly, silently, as if not to disturb what was breaking open and being poured out. He stayed until the shadows grew long and the fire grew dim. Then he placed my lid back on and stood, slower than before, heavier somehow. But as he walked away, I sensed something had lifted, not all of it, but enough to make room for a breath, for a step, for another day. I do not know who he was. I do not know what he carried, but I have never forgotten him, just as I have never forgotten any of them. The ones who came not to be seen, but to surrender. The ones who asked for nothing but dared to hope for everything. There is something sacred in anonymity, in being the place where burdens are laid without needing to be named. I was never the center, never the focus, but I was always close, always near enough to catch the tears before they fell to the floor, always near enough to catch the prayers before they vanished into silence. Even now, hidden and forgotten, I am not empty. What I held was never mine alone. It belonged to every soul who poured themselves out in faith, in desperation, in reverence. I carry their offerings still. Once, in the depth of winter, a child came, alone, small hands wrapped tightly around a strip of fabric, worn from clutching. She looked at me as if she recognized me, as if she had been told stories of what I was. Her fingers brushed against my side, and in that touch, I felt both a question and a hope. She did not speak. She had no incense. She had nothing to offer but herself. And somehow, that was enough. She knelt, and though the room was cold, though the fire was out, I felt warmth. Not the kind that comes from flame, but the kind that comes from belief. I do not know where she went. I do not know if she ever returned, but I believe she found what she was seeking. Not in flame, not in smoke, but in the quiet, in the courage to be still, to hope, to ask without words. Sometimes I think the greatest prayers are the ones never spoken, the ones held in shaking hands and offered with nothing more than a breath. And Ian, old, dusty jar, was there to receive them, to remember them, to keep them alive in the space where memory and mystery meet. That is my purpose. The world outside has changed. I feel it in the footsteps that no longer pass, in the silence that is no longer expectant but settled. There is a weight to being forgotten, but I carry it not as punishment, but as vocation. I am the keeper of what once was holy, and I believe, with a faith born not of doctrine but of devotion, that holiness does not die. It waits, it watches, it breathes beneath the dust, and one day, when the time is right, it will rise again, not in thunder, not in spectacle, but in a moment small enough to miss if one is not paying attention. A child's touch, a single flame, a breath held and released. That is where the holy makes its home, not in grandeur, but in grace. And so I remain, not just a jar of clay, but a witness, a vessel of remembrance. I do not need to be polished. I do not need to be displayed. I only long to be part of that moment again, the one where something unseen becomes felt, where someone forgotten becomes found, where a prayer rises and the silence answers. Even if I am never opened again, I am not without purpose. I carry the stories, I cradle the longing, and as long as even a trace of that sacred fragrance lingers within me, I will believe, I will wait, for the one who once walked among the prayers I held, for the one who was promised, for the one whose presence once filled this room, though he had not yet arrived. I do not know his name the way you do, but I know the echo of him. I know the warmth that stirred when people spoke of a savior, a healer, a king not yet seen. Perhaps that is why the scent has not faded entirely. Perhaps it is not merely the resin, but the hope. Perhaps what lingers in me is not just the past, but the promise. And maybe, just maybe, that promise is drawing near. I do not know the hour, I do not know the day, but I know the signs. I feel them in the air, in the hush that comes not from absence, but from anticipation. Something is coming, someone. And when he arrives, I will not need to speak. I will not need to explain. I will only open and give. They say scent is the strongest memory, and if that is true, then I am nothing but memory, pressed into clay, sealed beneath a lid that no longer fits. I do not breathe, yet I remember the way the air once moved around me, slow and thick with expectation, like the hush before a storm or the moment before a kiss. I do not hear, yet I remember the weight of silence filled with breathless prayers. They never came with noise, those who found their way to me. They came with absence, with what they had lost, with hollowness they hoped would be filled, or fullness they could no longer carry. I held their offerings, not with hands but with presence, with the quiet dignity of one who listens without demand. They poured their longing into the fire, and I, silent and still, received it. Some of them touched me as if I were alive. Their fingertips traced the edge of my rim, reverent, uncertain, like they feared I might speak. I never did, not in words. But I answered with smoke. That was always enough. Once, a young man came at night. He was bleeding not from the body, but from the spirit. You could feel it in the way he moved, cautious, like someone walking through a memory he wasn't sure he wanted to relive. He lit the smallest coal and placed the resin with shaking hands. The flame barely caught. The scent rose, faint but stubborn, and he closed his eyes as if to hold on to it. He didn't stay long. He didn't speak. But when he left, he looked different. Not healed, but opened. And that was something. That was enough. Others came with joy. There was once a mother who had waited for years to carry a child. And when she finally did, she brought him to the temple and knelt beside me. She didn't say a word, just held him near the flame and offered her thanks with eyes full of tears. The scent of that moment lingers still, sweet and light, and almost like sunlight itself. Those are the memories that press themselves deepest into clay. Not the grand gestures, not the incense poured in plenty, but the quiet ones, the offerings made with trembling hands, with faith that had no words left. I wonder sometimes if they knew what they gave me. Not just resin, but their memories, their grief, their praise, their hunger. I carry them all. Even now, when no one comes, when the fire is cold and my lid is covered in dust, I carry them. The room is darker than it used to be. The stones cracked in places. Time has taken its toll, but I remain. I was made for fire, but I have endured the cold. And though no priest has spoken my name in years, though no hand has stirred my contents, I still know who I am. I am the keeper of what once was holy. I am the memory of 1,000 prayers. I am the breath between silence and response. I am the vessel that held not answers, but yearning. And that yearning lives still, somewhere deep inside me, sealed into the very pores of my clay. I do not know if I will ever be opened again. I do not know if the fire will ever burn beneath me again. But I believe that what was once sacred is never truly forgotten. It waits, like a seed beneath the earth, like a song waiting to be sung. I have felt the stillness change before. I have felt presence descend without sound. I have held moments that bent time, that slowed breath, that lit fire without flame. These things do not vanish. They rest. They remain. And when the time is right, they rise. Perhaps someone will come again, not to perform, but to remember, not to offer, but to open themselves, and in doing so, open me. And in that opening, the past will become present, the memory will become movement, and the scent will rise again, not for ceremony, but for connection. It will rise and fill the space between heartbeats, between doubt and belief, between what has been and what could still be. And I will know, even if no one speaks it aloud, that the holy has returned, not because it ever left, but because someone finally stopped long enough to notice. That is all I wait for now, not a hand, not a priest, not a ritual, but a pause, a breath, a question. In that space, I live again. I am not waiting to be used, I am waiting to be remembered. And when that happens, I will not need to speak. My scent will say everything, that I was here, that they were heard, that something holy once burned here and never truly went out. And even if no one ever comes again, even if the fire never glows and the lid never lifts, I will remain what I was made to be. Not a relic, not forgotten clay, but a vessel that once carried the invisible into the world. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps being the memory is itself a kind of offering. Perhaps scent alone can stir hearts long closed. Perhaps the holy does not need to be found, only felt. And when the right soul walks in, empty and aching and brave enough to breathe deeply, they will know. They will not need to ask what I am or why I was made. They will inhale, and in that breath, they will understand. And perhaps, in that moment, something long dormant within them will awaken too. Not in noise, not in spectacle, but in the quiet rising of something holy. That is what I wait for. That is what I remember. That is what I still am. I was never meant to leave this place. My form was shaped not for travel, but for presence. I was created to remain, to hold stillness, to cradle what others could not. But I remember the day I was lifted, not in reverence, but in haste. I had become invisible to them, just another object left behind. The hands that grabbed me were unfamiliar, rough, hurried, not the hands of those who understood what I carried. I was shoved into a sack among tools and rags, and for the first time, I felt afraid. Not for myself, I am clay. I do not break easily, but for what might be lost, if my contents were spilled, if the last breath of sacred resin was wasted on a careless gesture. I was taken far from the room I had always known, and the scent of that holy place faded behind me like a song ending too soon. I do not know how long I was carried. The world outside moved fast. The rhythms were harsher, louder, nothing like the soft footfalls and whispered prayers I had known. I was jostled, dropped once, the lid cracking slightly but holding. The scent remained, trapped but trembling. I was placed in a dark corner, forgotten among clutter, and for days, perhaps weeks, no one touched me. It was there, in that forgotten space, that I began to wonder if purpose could survive dislocation. I had always believed holiness was tied to place, to ritual, to the sacred room where I once stood. But now I was learning something new, that memory could carry its own altar, that the sacred could travel in silence, even into obscurity. Then one evening, the sack was opened. A man reached in, searching for me, but for something else, and his hand brushed against my lid. He paused. I felt it, that hesitation, that flicker of recognition. He lifted me slowly, turning me in his palms, as if trying to remember. There was dust on my sides, a fine layer of neglect, but the faint scent still lingered. He opened me, just a little, enough, and the scent rose again, not strong, not assertive, but insistent. He breathed it in, eyes closing. His breath caught, not from surprise, but from memory. He didn't speak, but he didn't put me down either. For a long time, he sat there, holding me as if I were a question he had long stopped asking, and now suddenly remembered. Then, with unexpected gentleness, he placed me on a small table. He lit a candle, not coal, not flame for offering, but light enough to see. And in that soft light, I felt seen again. He left me there, uncovered. The scent drifted slowly into the air, wrapping around books and papers and quiet, flickering thoughts. Others entered the room. No one noticed me at first, but someone paused near the table, lifted me, and smiled faintly. They didn't know my name. They didn't know my story, but something in them responded to what still lingered inside me. A teacher placed me near her scrolls. A child once touched my lid and then ran away giggling, saying I smelled like stories. I did not know what that meant, but I liked it. I was no longer in the temple, but I had not been emptied. I began to understand that presence does not depend on walls or rituals. Holiness does not belong only to the places built for it. Sometimes it chooses the unlikely, the overlooked, the broken. Sometimes it speaks through a cracked lid and a scent that will not fade. I saw faces come and go. Some paused, some stayed, some cried. No incense was burned, but I felt the same hush return, the breath. Before prayer, the silence that listens. It was smaller, quieter, less defined than before, but it was real. I was still fulfilling my purpose, even if no one named it. And then one day, a voice, gentle, aged, called me by a name I hadn't heard in generations. Not my crafted name, but the name of what I carried, prayer. The old man who spoke it did not touch me. He only nodded, as if greeting an old friend. He sat nearby and whispered a psalm, not loudly, not for anyone else, just for God. And for a moment, I felt it again, that nearness, that sacred closeness that once made the temple walls pulse with invisible life. He left before the sun fully rose, but he left me uncovered in the center of the table. No one has moved me since. The room is quiet, but it breathes. I do not know if I will be carried again, if the temple still stands, if the people still gather in the old ways. But I have learned that sacredness is not a place, it is a presence. And as long as someone walks in carrying questions too big for words, grief too heavy for language, or joy too full to contain, then I will still be here, waiting to rise, not to be used, but to be remembered, not to be filled, but to be known. I was never just a container. I was a witness. And even now, with time settled in my bones and silence as my closest companion, I know that one day, the breath of a seeker will find me again. And in that breath, the holy will rise once more. The day I first saw him, I did not know who he was. To me, he was only another visitor, another set of footsteps that echoed differently on the temple stones. But there was something in his silence, something that stirred what remained in me. He did not rush. He did not glance. He moved as though he had already been here, long before he arrived. And when he passed by, he paused not at me, but near me. Close enough for the scent to reach him, close enough for something ancient to awaken. That moment stays with me. There was no ritual, no smoke, no prayer spoken aloud, but he paused. That pause was enough. It was as if he was listening to something deeper than silence, sensing something long buried but not dead. I remembered the old priest who once whispered that some men carry the temple within them. Perhaps this was one of those. The air shifted around him, not with incense, but with expectancy. And though I had no tongue, I wanted to call to him, not for myself, but for what still lingered inside me. I wanted him to know that I had waited, that I still remembered what prayer smelled like when it rose from broken hearts. But he moved on, slowly, without haste, as if he carried every grief he saw. Days passed, or perhaps it was only hours. Time does not move the same for those of us left waiting. Then, one morning, the room filled with voices. Not the kind I once knew. These were harsh, urgent, echoing off the stone with the weight of judgment. He had returned, not as visitor, but as accused. I could not see him, but I felt the weight of that moment settle into the walls. The ground itself held its breath. He did not shout, he did not plead, but something in the silence spoke louder than condemnation. I remembered the child who once spilled frankincense and cried not from fear but from reverence. I remembered the mother who came barefoot, weeping, carrying a shawl that smelled of ashes and milk. All those moments, all those offerings, they lived still, pressed into me. And now he stood in the same space, not to give, but to be given, to be broken. I did not understand it fully then, but something inside me ached. It was not fear, it was the ache of recognition. The scent that rose around him was not mine, yet it was familiar. It was the scent of surrender, of something poured out without demand. He was led away, but the ache remained. And in the days that followed, it grew. Whispers traveled even to dark corners. He had died, crucified. I had no tears to offer, but if I could have wept, the stone beneath my lid would have turned bitter. The scent of loss is sharp. It lingers in corners, in cracked vessels, in the quiet after hope breaks. I was not in the garden, but I felt the stillness there. I was not at the tomb, but I trembled when the stone was rolled. I could feel the memory of fire growing cold. And then came the morning. I was still in shadow when it happened, but even darkness can recognize light. The scent shifted, not mine, not smoke, but life. A presence passed again, not with steps or sound, but with weight. A sacred heaviness, the kind that turns silence into sanctuary. I remembered the boy who once hid behind the altar, whispering verses he barely understood, hoping God would hear. I remembered the girl who came with a broken comb, her offering wrapped in cloth, believing it would be enough. And I thought perhaps he remembers them too. Perhaps he carried them with him through the garden, through the trial, through the tomb. And now, with breath returned, he walks as if every sorrow he once touched still clung to him, not as burden, but as blessing. I could almost smell it, not the scent of resin, but of mercy, of memory sanctified by suffering. And I wondered, did he still remember the prayers whispered in fear, the offerings made by trembling hands, or had the weight of the cross silenced them all? I wanted to ask, but I had no voice. So I waited, and in that waiting, I prayed the only way I knew how, by holding on to what was left, a fragment of my last ember, a trace of longing pressed into old clay. I held it not for myself, but for the day someone might need it again, the day someone might come seeking not answers, but presence. And perhaps that day had returned. I do not know what came after. He left, or perhaps he simply passed through, but the stillness he left behind was not empty. It pulsed, it waited, like I do, like the earth does, like every vessel ever shaped by hands that hope. So I remain, cracked but not broken, forgotten but not emptied. And when the breath of a weary soul draws near and dares to hope again, I will still be here, not whole, not shining, but ready to rise in silence, ready to witness, ready to carry one more scent of faith offered in the dark. And if no one comes, then let this be my final prayer, that what I held was never wasted, that what I remember still matters, and that in the quiet wait of my waiting, he might pass by once more. I once filled the temple air, my scent sweet, bitter, ancient toast to dance with the rising prayers, mingling with ash, wind, and whispers of repentance. I was offered, broken, and burned, a ritual crackling under priestly hands. And in that smoke, hearts reached upward. But now, I lie sealed in darkness, forgotten in a jar with a cracked lid, left behind in a chamber where dust prays louder than people do. I wait. Still fragrant, still willing, but no one comes. And still, I remember. I remember her, the woman who used to prepare me. Her fingers were gentle, though her heart was heavy. She sang old psalms while grinding me into powder, her voice quivering like the flame beside her. Blessed be the name of the Lord. She sang even when her husband didn't return from war, even when her youngest was taken by fever. The day she ground me for the last time, she pressed her forehead to the table and didn't rise for hours. I wanted to comfort her, but I was only resin. I remember the priests. Their robes brushed past me like waves against rock. They never spoke to me, but their hands knew the weight of reverence. I knew when the high holy days came, not from calendars, but from the way they held me more slowly, more carefully, as if afraid I might flee. Once, I was poured over hot coals while the ark lay open. The smoke thickened, the veil trembled, and a soundless gasp spread across the stone. They said the Lord dwelled among them, and I just was allowed to touch the hem of his presence. I remember the boy, small, curious, with curls like unraveled thread. He slipped past the guards one day, wandered into the inner court, and stared at me. Not at the gold or the scrolls or the robes, at me. I don't know why. He reached out a hand, but before it met the jar, a Levite's voice barked, and he vanished like breath in winter. Yet I remember his gaze. It was not the look of someone admiring a relic. It was the gaze of someone who understood what longing smells like. Now, the temple stands still. The walls still breathe, but barely. Fewer feet echo on the stones. Fewer prayers rise. The world outside speaks of war, of strange kings, of silence from the heavens. But I, the scent of longing, remain. My aroma has faded only slightly, like the memory of a dream that still stirs the chest but not the mind. I'm not ready to die. Resins do not die. They wait, and in waiting, I listen. I've heard rumors, not from the priests, but from the wind that slips through cracks in the stone. Whispers of a child born among beasts, of a woman who glowed with both agony and glory, of stars moving in ways they shouldn't, and in sesame carried by foreigners wrapped in foreign silks, offered not in a temple but to a baby. A king, they say, a priest, a sacrifice. I should be there. I should be poured at his feet, crushed and burned and transformed again into breath that fills holy lung. I ache, not because I am forgotten, but because I was made for him, not for jars, not for shelves, for altars, for moments when heaven touches earth and nothing can stay the same. I ache the way a seed aches for soil, or a song aches for voice. This waiting is not passive. It's a cry without sound, a hope without proof. But it is still hope. If the rumors are true, then he has come. But not here, not to this forgotten room, not to this brittle jar. I wonder why. I wonder if I am no longer needed, or if I am being saved for a later day, a darker hour, a more costly offering. I wonder if, one day, I will be cracked open not by priests, but by a woman with trembling hands and eyes that have seen too much. I wonder if my scent will rise not in ceremony, but in sorrow, not at an altar, but near a tomb. Until then, I remain, a vessel of longing, a keeper of echoes, a silent hymn shaped in clay. And in the hush between what has been and what will be, I listen, for footsteps, for breath, for the return of the one who turned locked rooms into holy ground. And when he comes, I will not ask to be filled again. I will only open. Let my clay remember him. Let the fragrance remember. Let the silence remember. Let it all remain. I had no name, but I was called many things. Cloth, linen, covering, wrapping. I was never meant to last. I was made for burial, not memory. And yet I remember the weight of him. Not heavy, not burdensome, but full. A fullness that silence carries after the final breath, the kind that bends time. They placed him upon me with care, though their hands shook. The men tried not to weep, but I felt their tears fall through me. One touched his face and whispered something I could not hear. Another folded his hands over the chest, pausing as though afraid to let go. I held him then not as a mother holds a child, but as earth holds seed, wrapped in darkness yet aching for dawn. My fibers remembered his wounds, each line soaked in blood and oil, mingled like prophecy and dust. He did not move, he did not breathe, and yet something in me refused to call it the end. The tomb received us, cold, still. The stone rolled, sealing the silence in. But even in that stillness, I waited. I had wrapped many bodies before. Some kings, some beggars, all returned to dust, but not him, not this one. There was a weight in the tomb that was not death, it was promise, a heaviness that hummed, not decayed. I do not know how long we lay like that, him wrapped in stillness, me wrapped around mystery. No sun, no moon, only the scent of myrrh and the memory of his final breath. But then it came, not a noise, not a tremor, a shift, a warmth, as if the tomb itself inhaled. I felt it first in the fibers, the way cloth reacts after water. He moved, not suddenly, but like dawn creeps across stone. Breath filled the chamber, his breath, the same breath that once calmed storms, that called Lazarus forth, now returned to lungs that had stilled. I could not cry out, I could only loosen, slowly, reverently, falling away from him like night, retreating from light. He sat up, he stood, he folded me. Folded, not cast aside, not trampled or torn, but folded with hands that remembered care. That one act simple, sacred told me it was not over. He left me there, on the stone, alone, yet not abandoned. I held his warmth for moments after he vanished from my fibers, as if even cloth can remember touch. The stone was still cool, the air still hushed, but everything had changed. I could feel it in the emptiness. It was not the void of loss, it was the fullness of fulfillment. Others came, running, panting, peering in. I did not move. I had no voice to explain, only the folds bore witness. They looked, they wept. Some fell to their knees, others turned away, eyes wide with terror or wonder, but I remained. A silent testimony folded on stone, holding the absence that proved presence. Time passed, dust settled. The tomb grew quiet again, yet I was never just linen. I had become memory. I had become the first relic of resurrection, no longer bound to death, but to the moment when death lost its grip. I often wondered, why fold me? Why not leave me draped in divine disorder? But I think I know. He wanted them to see, to notice, to pause. That fold was his whisper. I have not discarded this. I have fulfilled it, and if a burial cloth can be folded with love, then so can sorrow, so can silence, so can the long nights of waiting. I remained there for days, until someone finally lifted me, trembling. I was taken, not to be used again, but to be kept, revered, protected. I, who was made for endings, now carried the beginning. I, who had wrapped the dead, now enfolded hope. They placed me in a chest, locked behind sacred doors, hidden from sight but not from memory. Pilgrims would come, some in secret, some with songs, some with silence too loud to speak. They would kneel, not to me, but to the one I once held, and in their tears, I felt again the weight of that holy body, not as burden, but as blessing. I have aged, threads loosened, edges frayed, but the scent of myrrh still lingers. So does the echo of his breath. If cloth can remember, then I do. I remember the hush of the tomb, the rustle of angels, the gasp of the living who found it empty. And more than that, I remember the fold, that quiet act of care in a cave where death once claimed victory. No one saw it happen. No one recorded the moment he rose and reached for me. But I was there. I felt his hands, gentle, certain, alive. Sometimes I wonder if, when the end of days comes and all is unveiled, they will see not just thrones and trumpets, but fold-creases in linen that held divine intention. Sometimes I wonder if my fibers will speak, if they will sing the story they carried not in words, but in scent, in silence, in presence. I do not long to be touched again. I do not ache for use. I am content to remain hidden, for even hidden things can shine. I was never the miracle, I only held it, and that is enough. That is glory. If ever hands lift me again, I pray they do not look for magic in the threads, but for memory, for mercy, for the fold that whispered, I have risen. Let them remember that he did not need me, but chose me, that he did not leave chaos, but order, that the fold was not for neatness, but for love. And if cloth can be loved, then so can every broken, buried, forgotten thing. I was linen, I was nothing, and then I was folded. I was remembered. I was part of the story no one saw but everyone needed. That is why I remain. That is why I still breathe his breath in my threads. That is why, even now, I wait. Let the tomb be remembered not for stone, but for softness. Not for darkness, but for the fold that dared to say, love has the last word. So let them fold me again, if they must. Let them touch what once touched him. Let them believe, not because they see, but because even empty linen remembers. I was not the miracle, but I was there, and I still am, hidden, silent, but never forgotten. And that is enough for memory, for mercy, for resurrection. Let even linen bear witness. Let even silence remember. I am the hill, not just any hill, the one they call Golgotha, the place of the skull. For years, they passed by me without pause. Dusty feet, herds, traders, soldiers, children too young to understand what bones lie beneath their play. But I remember every cry that fell upon me, every stone tossed, every knee broken, every body buried. I have never been holy, only hard, only high, only chosen for death. And yet, I knew the day would come, not because prophets whispered, but because the soil tightens when something eternal draws near. And on that day, I felt the sky retreat. Not with thunder, but with breath held. The crowd came, some jeering, some weeping, some silent. They brought wood, not for warmth, for execution. They brought ropes, nails, orders, and then they brought him. I had felt many feet upon me, but never like his. Each step seemed to ask permission, not from the soldiers, from me, as if he knew I had borne too much. As if he wanted me to know I see you. I climbed with him. Or rather, he climbed with Minot in conquest, but in surrender. They laid the wood down. They stretched him upon it. And I, the hill, tried not to tremble. But when the first nail struck, I cracked beneath. Not from pressure, but from pain. Not mine, his. The earth has many layers, and mine carry centuries of blood. But none like this. His blood sank faster, deeper, as if it knew where to go, as if it had always belonged here. I felt it speak to the roots, to the bones, to every buried breath beneath me. The sky darkened, the wind ceased, but not the cries. They pierced me more than any stake, especially hers, the one who called him son. Her voice carried the weight of every mother who ever buried hope. When he spoke, the sound did not echo. It sank, into me, into the stone, into the silence that followed. And when he breathed his last, I broke, not visibly, not to the crowds, but inside, the kind of fracture that never seals. They left him there, hanging, and I held him, not with arms, with gravity, with earth. The stone drank his blood, the soil warmed with it. Flowers do not bloom here, but if they did, they would carry his scent. I remember when they lowered him. The silence was not respectful. It was hollow, like a well with no bottom. They placed him in the tomb nearby, not mine, but close enough that I could still feel him. And when they sealed it, something in me remained unsealed. Time passed. The sun rose, the sun set, soldiers stood, women wept. But then came the trembling, not of war, of wonder. The stone rolled, the grave breathed, and though I could not see, I knew. The earth knows when the dead do not stay dead. I felt his feet again, not heavy with sorrow, but light with promise. He had risen, and in that moment, Golgotha, place of skulls, place of endings, became the hill of beginnings. Pilgrims came, centuries passed. They built upon me, tore down, built again. They named me sacred. They touched my rocks, took my dust, prayed in my shadow. But I remember the real holiness. It did not arrive with banners or incense. It came bleeding, breathing, dying, rising. I am not proud to be the hill. I did not choose this, but I have been chosen, and that changes everything. Even stone can remember. Even soil can witness. Even places soaked in death can hold resurrection. I do not speak, but if you kneel upon me, if you press your ear against my rocks, you might still hear it, the echo of forgiveness, the last breath of the crucified, the first breath of the risen. And if you carry sorrow here, let it fall into my cracks. Let it become part of my remembering, because I do not forget. I carry the weight of every grief. But more than that, I carry the print of redemption. His blood did not just stain me, it sanctified me. His death did not just mark me, it transformed me. I am still rough, still hard, but I am no longer only the place of skulls. I am the place where mercy touched ground, where judgment bent low, where love hung and did not run. And if ever again the world feels abandoned, let them come back to me. Let them kneel where he knelt, fall where he fell, and rise where he rose. Not in body perhaps, but in spirit. Let them know he was here. He chose this height, this pain, this stone, and he did not curse it, he blessed it. And if a hill can be blessed, then so can you. Then so can every place of sorrow, every edge of despair, every corner of the earth that has seen too much blood. I remain, weathered, worn, but not forgotten. Pilgrims still come, some in sandals, some in silence, some in search for something they cannot name. They touch the stones, hoping to feel the past. But I want them to feel more than memory. I want them to feel the moment everything changed. Not just a death, a gift, not just an ending, a beginning. And when the wind brushes through the cracks, when the dusk settles quiet over my slopes, I still feel it, the warmth of his blood, the hush of his voice, the final yes that broke the world open. So come, stand where he stood. Weep if you must, but know this, you stand on holy ground, not because of stone, but because of surrender. You stand where love refused to leave, where grace made its final stand, where death thought it had won, but morning said otherwise. And when you go, take nothing, leave only your sorrow, your silence, your longing. I will hold them, as I held him, and when the light comes again, and it will, I will remember you too. For even hills, even broken places, even places named for skulls can become altars. Let Golgotha be your beginning. Let the ground that bore him also bear you. Let what once held the crucified now cradle the rising within you. And if ever you forget, return. I will remember. I always do. For I was broken and then blessed. And in that blessing, I became more than stone. I became the hill that held the holy. And I still do. Even now, I hold him in the memory of my stones. This is my sacred weight. I am the wind, not the roar, not the storm, but the breath that lingers, the sigh between silences. I have touched palaces and deserts, scrolls and sandals, prophets and prisoners. But nothing ever held me like that moment in the upper room. I was there. No one noticed me. They were too afraid. The doors were locked. The air was stale with mourning. I swirled between shadows, brushing the corners, carrying whispers of prayers not yet spoken aloud. And then he came, not through the door, not with footsteps. He simply was, and with him, so was I. Not a gale, not a rush, just presence. The kind that quiets even me. He said, "Peace be with you." And in that breath, I found my name. I was not just wind, I was his peace. I danced around their fear, their disbelief. I tasted their tears as they reached for him. Some still doubted, so he showed them his hands, his side, and I swirled between the wounds, not to sting but to bear witness. Then he breathed. On them, into them, receive the Holy Spirit, he said. And in that moment, I became more than wind. I became promise, presence, power. I filled lungs that once held fear. I moved through them not to shake the room, but to steady hearts. I went where they went, into alleys and temples, across borders, beneath lashes. I was there when Peter stood tall before councils. I was there when Stephen saw the heavens open. I carried the songs of Paul in prison. I carried the weeping of John into exile. I am not always loud. Sometimes I am just breath in a broken room. Sometimes I am only a whisper in the chest of someone who dares to believe again. I have no shape, no voice of my own, but I carry his. I remember that upper room not for its walls, but for the silence that gave way to breath. He did not come with force. He came with wounds, with breath, and made peace out of pain. I go where he sends me, through tongues of fire, through the crack of prison doors, through the trembling hands of martyrs and the breaking hearts of mothers. I am in the alleys where the name of Jesus is whispered in fear and yet clings like fire in the ribs. I do not choose who hears me, but I lean into the listening. I bend around brokenness. I carry the groans that words cannot form. I was there when Thomas touched the wound and found faith. I was there when the doors opened and the world rushed in. I was the breath between denial and restoration, between failure and call. When he said, "Peace be with you," he was not silencing grief. He was giving it a home. I have learned to linger in wounds more than in victory. I move through scars more freely than through sermons. Do not wait for thunder to know I am near. Wait for the exhale. Wait for the stillness that pulses with promise. I am not the ending. I am what remains when all else has fallen away. I was there when the veil tore, not as a gust, but as breath returning to lungs that had stopped hoping. I am the Spirit's breath, the breath of the risen one, not to be trapped, not to be claimed, only to be received, and received again. I still circle around the broken-hearted, lifting prayers like incense. I do not rush, I remain, long after the room empties, long after the songs fade. I rest upon shoulders bowed not from shame, but from awe. I am not the miracle, but I was there when the miracle breathed again. I was there when he gave his breath away, not just to die, but to remain. And so I do. I remain, through centuries, through cathedrals and catacombs, through dry bones and distant cries. I do not age. I do not fade. I only follow the breath of the one who once folded death like a garment and left it behind. I do not boast. I am breath, not voice, but in me lives the memory of resurrection. The hush before joy breaks open. I wait in rooms locked by fear. I linger where faith has dimmed. I am the answer to the prayer no one dares to voice aloud. Come, Holy Spirit, they say, and I do, not always in fire, sometimes only as air, as hope, as breath returning. So breathe now, breathe deep, for I am here. I was there then, and I am here now. Let this breath be enough, enough to mend, to move, to make alive again. I do not depart. I dwell, in sighs, in songs, in silence, especially in silence. Where words fail, I remain. Where strength ends, I begin. I do not carry answers. I carry presence. The presence that held Thomas when doubt screamed louder than memory. The presence that wrapped around Peter when shame burned red in his chest. The presence that hovered over Mary when she said yes to the impossible. I was not seen then. I am not seen now, but I am there. When you wake with the ache of questions, when you stand before the tomb of hope, when you sit in rooms with doors locked by grief or guilt, I am not the key. I am the breath before the door open, the pause between sorrow and song, the moment you cannot explain but cannot deny. I have moved through centuries, through martyrs' cries and children's whispers, through cloisters and cellars, through deserts and dens. I have heard the same prayer rise again and again, come, and I do. I come without trumpet, without title, sometimes only as a breath that steadies hands trembling over bread. I am not doctrine. I am not debate. I am the breath behind every yes spoken in fear and still spoken. I do not need a name to move. I need only space. So give me that. Give me the crack in your confidence, the hesitation in your hallelujah, the pause in your prayer. I will fill it. I will be the breath when you have none left. And when all else fails, faith, hope, Vision, know this. I remain. I hover over the waters still, over the dust again, over your life, waiting for your yes, not to control, but to come. Let me come. Let me breathe. Let me be enough. For I am the breath he left behind, and I still move. Even now, I breathe in you. This is the holy breath of the risen one. Let it be enough. Let it be life. Let it be resurrection.